we go. All right, Matthew, this is take two. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How about you, brother?
Good, good. So I came across Matthew. He did a documentary, and I didn't realize he actually did it. I thought you were interviewed for it, but it was actually yours. And then I come to discover that you and I were, I was following you on Instagram. So tell us about this documentary, because I found it very, 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 very interesting to where we are today as a society.
Yeah, absolutely. So the documentary is called The Sins of Our Fathers, Race, Religion, and the Rise of Trump. And what we were trying to do is to connect the dots all the way from the racism and greed of slavery
Mm.
to the racism and greed that we see right now in our current situation. A lot of people, when they tell this story, they get up to the civil rights era and then they stop. And it's like, oh, 1964 came along and we changed our ways and everything is better and we live in a post-racial America. But if you're paying even remotely attention, you know that that's not true. The racism has continued, the greed has continued, the imperialism obviously not just
Mm.
continued but ramped up as we are, threatening to acquire Greenland, which is the most absurd thing I think anyone has ever seen who's paying
Insane.
attention.
Insane.
And so we wanted to connect the dots all the way back. And the original concept for the film actually went all the way back to the doctrine of discovery. And if you read Trump's letter to Norway, the president of Norway from 2 days ago, it's interesting. He said the claim that they have on Greenland is that the boats landed there. And he said, well, we have boats that have landed there too. And I thought, doctrine of discovery. We land here, therefore this is our land, and we can do whatever we want. So, again, what we're trying to do is realize that
Oh
everything we're
man.
seeing today is a result of the faulty foundation that we have built this nation upon. And again, we're just trying to bring this stuff to the surface so that we can
Yeah.
deal with it, you know?
Can I ask you a question? Because this is what I've struggled with. And we talked before we got on here that I grew up in a very abusive relationship with a Sunday Christian father. And I think what really resonated is when I hear people say that this is a Christian nation, okay? How do people that look like you and I, white people, look back at chattel slavery, lynchings, tearing fetuses out, putting salt in wounds of slaves, the Trail of Tears? How do we, not we, you and I, but people in this country that identify as Christians, how do they look at that and say, yes, this was a great Christian nation? How do you think that they justify all of the cruelty, the morality, and the murder, and say this is a reflection of Jesus? How do they justify that?
One of the problems is of how much history has been rewritten. So I don't know
Mm,
how familiar you are with the lost cause of the Confederacy, but there was a
a
big movement
little.
after this. Yeah, there was a huge movement after the Civil War to basically rewrite pre-Civil War history in the South and to soften the abuses of slavery, to whitewash it essentially.
Right.
And it was making out the Confederates to be the heroes, even though we lost. And that's why you see a lot of the Confederate statues. They didn't go up right away. They went up a lot later after the Civil War because there was
Mm,
this effort to sort of glorify the Old South. So the first problem, people don't know the history. So we have a romanticized version of slavery and Jim Crow and all of that. We don't know the gory parts of it. We really don't know. That was one of the reasons why we made the film, was to bring this
mm.
stuff to the surface so we can look at it. I think you can't
Er,
make change on a problem if you're not willing to look at the problem. And one of the issues that I have is that we are so reluctant to talk about race. We're so reluctant to be honest about our history or even just our current situation. One of the things I talk about all the time is what's the difference between Russia invading Ukraine and us invading Iraq, right? When we invade Iraq, we're the good guy. When Russia invades Ukraine, they're the bad guy, but it's the same thing. When we invade Greenland, we're the good guy. We're always the good guy. So it's just hard. I think we have to take a really an honest look at our past, present, and where we're
yeah.
going as a nation, because the course that we're on is unsustainable. But really, one of the threads that we develop in the film is this Christian connection, because a lot of people don't realize, again, we don't know our own history. So people
Hmm.
don't realize that slavery was justified in the name of Jesus. The scripture was pulled out of the Bible to justify slavery. One of the main justifications for slavery was we're pulling these African heathens, out of witchcraft and idolatry, and we're bringing them into the Christian faith, even though they're in chains. Somehow we said that we justified in our minds that it was a Christian redemption.
Mm,
Jim Crow was theologized. The idea was that God separated all the races at the Tower of Babel, that he wanted us to be separate. He wanted us to be separate by race and ethnicity. And they conveniently ignored the story of Pentecost, where God brought all the races and ethnicities and languages back together
do,
after the crucifixion and the resurrection of
yeah.
Jesus. So it's picking and choosing from the Bible. We have theologized the war on drugs. We have theologized Trump. We have made him to be a type of Cyrus, or a David. All this biblical imagery around it, and that's why we talk about Christian nationalism. It's really taking a Christian, like a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's what better sheep's clothing than Jesus himself. And
Hmm.
so we put the sheep's clothing on top of the wolf of the American empire, and people
Mm,
buy it because people unfortunately were easily deceived. Deception is powerful because it's deceptive, and we have convinced ourselves that we are something that we are not. And again, our point, my whole thing, I am a Christian. I'm a strong Christian. I don't want to turn anyone away from Christianity or Jesus. I just want to turn people to the real Jesus, who actually opposed empire
yeah.
himself, and who said the meek shall inherit the earth, not might makes right. So the whole thing to me is
Yeah.
repentance is turning away from something to something else. If we don't know what we're turning away from, we can't repent of it. So this
Well,
thread
let
of
me,
racism and greed
yeah.
has been here since the beginning.
I've thought about something and I wanted to get your, in some way, going back to what you said, I believe that MAGA is actually the remnants of the lost cause, which is what you're talking about, right? They fought for slavery. I mean, when you look at the secession speeches from, I think it was Texas and Mississippi, their justification for maintaining slavery was that black people, based on the color of their skin, they were the only people that were qualified to work in tropical climates. So if you take away slavery, it's going to be detrimental to the agriculture industry, right? I mean, but what happened was they said, oh no, it's states' rights, it's states' rights. And it's what you're saying is they whitewashed it. So I actually think, do you agree that I believe that MAGA is actually the remnants of the lost cause? Would you agree with that on some
Well, yeah,
level?
and you have to talk about states' rights to do what? It was very clear if you look at those documents. South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union. That the Civil War was fought over states' rights to own slaves. Like that's what it was.
Right.
There was no qualms about it, and we create that thread clearly in the film. So there is a thread in it, and the South during the time of slavery and Jim Crow, it was all solid Democrat. And so a lot of people say, well, the Democrats are the party of the KKK and slavery, and that is true. But you have to
Mm-hmm.
understand, in the South, there was really no opposition to the Democratic Party at that time.
You're talking about
And
the
then
Dixiecrats way back when.
the Dixiecrats, yeah. And so, started by Strom Thurmond. But there, the Southern strategy, is real. You have 1964, the Republican Party, nominated Barry Goldwater, who opposed the Civil Rights Act. So since that time, since 1964, white people have voted for the Republican Party as a majority, for in every presidential election since 1964. Reagan and Nixon, that was the era of the dog whistles, racist dog whistles. Nixon was big on law and order. Reagan
Mm-hmm.
talked about welfare queens and strapping young bucks eating T-bone steaks on food stamps. And so
Toxic masculinity.
all those Southerners who were in the Democratic Party for a solid 100 years during Jim Crow, they all eventually came over into the Republican Party. And the black community that had been solid Republican because of Abraham Lincoln and their
Mm.
loyalty to him eventually switched into the Democratic Party. So there was a switch, and a lot of people dispute that, which is I don't understand because it's very clear. But the thread that we made was that the group of people that were justifying
Mm.
slavery and justifying Jim Crow and who are now justifying Trump using scripture were white Christians. And that is the thread that we established. I think it's easier to establish because it's less murky.
Yeah.
And again, I don't understand it. Like I was in a church, for 10 years with my family. My wife and I raised our kids there, and they went all in with Trump, and we were having these debates and having all these conversations. It was very hard for me to understand that, and I still don't understand it,
I
how we got there. But again, I
I
feel like it's my job just to bring it to the light so we can
yeah.
repent and change.
I have a theory on that, and I want to run it by you because I think you might have looked at this, maybe not. When you go back to the Sanhedrin that crucified Jesus, right? This Jesus guy that fed the poor and helped the sick and talked about empathy and compassion and kindness and loving thy neighbor, putting the guard's ear back on. Even when he was dying, he said, "Forgive them, for they don't know what they do." They literally justified murdering Jesus in the name of God, and then they had a chance to back away and say, "Oh, we made a mistake." And then Pontius Pilate said, "You can let Jesus go, who I see nothing wrong with, or you guys can pardon Barabbas, the guy who has murdered Christians, who was an insurrectionist, who was just an awful human being." And they chose Barabbas. Now, in some aspects, that parallel, you can argue, was an original form of MAGA, right? Anybody that doesn't fit into their religious agenda, they will justify misogyny, racism, violence. Does that parallel, does that make sense the way I'm trying to explain it? How it's justified in the name of God?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of parallels between the Pharisees and the current MAGA party. Jesus said a couple of things. First, he said, "Beware of the leaven of Herod
Mm,
and the Pharisees." So Herod representing the government, the Pharisees representing the religious leaders. When religious leadership merges with a government, it always ends up poorly. It always ends up bad. And again, in Jesus's case, it was the merging of Herod and the Pharisees that killed him, because the Pharisees didn't have the legal authority to kill him. That's why they needed Roman authority. That's why they went to Herod, and that's why they went to Pontius Pilate. Jesus also, if you look
yeah.
at Matthew 23, the entire chapter is Jesus's rebuke of the Pharisees. And he says
Yep.
some things that are very applicable today. So he says, "You strain out a gnat, but you swallow a camel." And so this is to
Mm,
me like Christians who are saying you got to live these holy lives and you got to do all this stuff, which I believe in. I'm a Christian, so
mhm.
I live my life a certain way. But then we swallow Donald Trump, and you're like, how does this fit with what we're doing? He says, you're like whitewashed tombs, like beautiful
Mm.
on the outside, but on the inside full of dead men's bones. And again, we have this outward appearance, like you're talking about Sunday Christians, but then we live these lies, like we support this guy that is literally the polar opposite of everything that we claim to believe in.
Why do
Uh,
you?
so
Yeah.
so I think it's a very apt parallel, and I think a lot of people are pointing it out.
There was another story. I think it was First Samuel 9 and then First Samuel 12, where they wanted an earthly king, and God told them no. Asked him again. He said no. A third time, he goes, "Fine, but this is what's going to happen. I told you no, and you wanted to be little
Right.
children and do what you wanted." They got their earthly king, and he says, "Okay, this is what's going to happen." And then First Samuel 12, the little children found out that they shouldn't have had an earthly king, and they said, "Sorry, sorry." And he enslaved them. He made them work for slave wages. They couldn't afford to eat. And I find that parallel with Saul very similar to today, because I kind of feel like what these MAGA have done, these modern day Pharisees, is that they wanted an earthly king. They want to play God, not follow God. Do you agree with that, or do you see where I'm coming
Oh,
with
I
that?
mean, I think that story of Samuel anointing Saul to be the king over Israel. I think that I just read that recently. God's
Yeah.
warning to the children of Israel. It's so much of what we're seeing, and look what's happened since Trump has taken office. His personal wealth has doubled.
Oh my God.
He has gained more wealth in 1 year, than, I mean, obviously more than any president in the history of the United States, but
Yeah.
by huge multiples. But we, as the people, are not getting richer. The
Yeah.
tariffs are making it harder to make a living. The ICE raids. I mean, listen, if you're going to oppress a people group, like, I mean, this is a sort of a crude example, but it just shows the insanity of what we're talking about. Like, people were enslaved. We went, to Africa, and we captured 12.9 million people. A lot of us don't understand the scale of this. And I'm
And
not saying those all went to America. 12.9 million Africans were captured in the transatlantic slave trade.
Hmm.
and brought to North America,
And 1.4
Caribbean.
million died on the boats and they were thrown into the ocean
Right.
and fed to bull sharks.
Yep,
It's disgusting. It's
exactly.
vile.
Crazy, crazy, right? So, but it was done, for economic profit. But like these ice raids are actually destroying our economy. We are
Yeah.
destroying ourselves from the inside out. So we're removing our construction workers, the people who pick our food, healthcare workers, restaurant owners. I mean,
Mm.
just all across the board, gardeners, landscapers. I mean, just indiscriminately destroying
No.
our country from the inside out. Anyway, all I'm saying is the point
Yeah.
is Trump is enriching himself, but it's making it
Yes.
harder for the rest of us to live. And we bought into the idea that he alone can fix it and all this stuff, and we're finding
Well,
that there is definitely a parallel there.
and see, this is the part that gets me, right? And I think that sometimes we as a society, and I'm not saying us as a society, the news, because I don't watch a lot of news because I think it's all a bunch of garbage. But I find it rich that 77 million people went to the voting booth and ignored pedophilia, rape, sexual assault, felonies, insurrection, literally calling women piggy, fat, and ugly, right? They said, oh, that's cool. I just want cheap eggs. What I find rich, right, is that somehow the brown people coming from Mexico that are working hard are the enemies. But at the same time, from a faith perspective, what bothers me is if you're supposed to build your wealth in heaven where moth and rust can't get, right? If you're supposed to give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, if it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle, why is it that these people that wave their Bibles and their gold crosses, the only thing that they vote on is I got more money in my pocket, but to hell with morality, decency, or integrity, building my wealth in heaven? How do they, for the people that you've talked to, how do they justify literally building their wealth on heaven is more important than morality and decency?
Well, I mean, I think it's more complicated than that because our whole political system is built on racist and religious dog whistles, right?
Correct.
So
Yep.
the Christians that I know vote on abortion. I say it in the film, and I've said it before. I voted for Trump in 2016 solely on the abortion issue. And what really turned my life around, my wife and I 11 years ago started a mentorship group in an inner city neighborhood in downtown Charleston. And
Mm.
as we were
I saw
doing that,
that.
I started realizing like the mythology that we tell ourselves about as white people about the black community is they're poor because they're lazy, or they're poor because they're baby mamas, they're poor because they're drug dealers. But I was looking at our city in this neighborhood, the East Side neighborhood of downtown Charleston was founded by slaves
Mm.
200 years ago after the War of 1812. And the neighborhood that I grew up in was founded by wealthy plantation owners about 200 years ago, right? And the neighborhood I grew up in is still very affluent and white, and the neighborhood that we were mentoring in is still impoverished and almost 99% black. And so I'm looking and I'm realizing like they're not poor because they did something wrong. They're poor because of historic oppression, of slavery and Jim Crow. And so I started digging, I started reading, I started researching, and I had already on this journey when the 2016 election came along. But I
Mm.
was told for years and years and years, the only issue that you vote on is abortion. And I literally could not go and pull the lever for anyone other than a Republican candidate because of that. Now,
That's
later I was
very, yeah,
able to, I was able to undo that. And but we have to understand how strong the abortion issue is in
it
terms of
is.
the church. It's got
It,
a stronghold
it,
in the church. And again, these politicians don't care about abortion. They just have learned that it works. And again, this is something that we unravel in the film.
yeah,
The modern religious right was not built on abortion. The modern religious right, the catalyst for it was animosity against desegregating schools.
right.
But abortion was put on top of that because abortion was a more palatable issue. Again,
No,
these politicians don't care a thing about abortion. They have just learned how to
no,
manipulate us. And then we
yeah.
also have racist dog whistles. So, DEI, CRT, woke, inner city crime, Antifa, these are
Affirmative
all
action.
racist. Yeah, affirmative action. These are all racist dog whistles that
Yeah.
politicians have used. Like I said, Reagan used welfare queens. We've had all of these, decades of different kinds of racist dog whistles. They're saying black, but they're not saying black, right? Now, the Hispanic animosity that is newer. Trump really sort of mastered that. It's the same idea. Again, we talk about this, but
Yeah.
this all it's all more, it's much more, it's more subtle and it's more calculated than we realize. I do think the price of eggs, that was the weirdest thing to me, like as if the president of the United States sets the price of eggs. Like we
Yeah.
that dumb? Like that
It,
part did baffle me, but there's more
I,
to it that's going on, I
I
think.
I think that was their justification for the racism. What that was their out was the price of eggs. I wanted to ask you about
That's
this
weird.
church.
I don't get
It was
that.
so stupid. I wanted to get
Oh
your
man.
opinion on this church thing. You heard about this thing in Minneapolis when people went into
Yeah, I
church.
did.
Listen, I understand that you can't just go into a church. Okay, I that part of it I get. But I also understand that the Jesus that I believe in, he probably would have been protesting the church and he would have said, "Listen, pastor, I told you to love thy neighbor as thyself. Why are you tearing families apart? In what world is this following my word? Like, I am I wrong? I almost think that Jesus would be turning tables over in that church. Is that I mean, that's kind of how I saw how the guy was a radical, like leftist, in my opinion. I mean, he was all for human rights.
Right. Well, so I mean, I think we have to temper this kind of thing. So ICE is bursting into sacred spaces of homes, churches, apartment complexes, and they're coming with, with
Guns.
aggression and yelling. So I didn't personally like going into a sacred space and yelling. I think the protest should stay outside. The temple context where Jesus went in and flipped the tables is a little bit different in terms of it being a more public space than the
I can see
like
that.
a private church would be. But I 100% agree that we should be protesting and really putting the question to Christian pastors, especially because the pastors are the gateway, right?
Yes.
And how have we gotten to this place where Leviticus 19 talks about treat the foreigner as your native born and love them. That word love is used in that scripture. And how do we get to ICE raids from that? And I mean,
Yeah.
I think again, one of the connections that I always make from the film, you go all the way back to the doctrine of discovery, the first explorers landing here and enslaving Native Americans and enslaving
Mm-hmm.
Africans. It's the dehumanization, right? So if you can dehumanize another people group, then you can justify whatever you want based on that.
Can I?
That's how it works,
Yeah.
right? So Trump came in for 10 years. He has been dehumanizing these Hispanic people. And I think one of the things Americans have to learn, we have to learn how to use our eyes and our ears because you can meet these people. You can meet them. Go out in the streets, go to, Walmart, you'll meet them. They're not who he says they are, but we believe him over what our
Right.
eyes and our ears say. 10 years of dehumanizing them, and now we're seeing the fruit of it. When you buy into wickedness, when you buy into evil, when you buy into lies, when you buy into corruption, when you buy into the opposite of what God says, you eventually over time you will see the manifestation of it. So we're seeing the manifestation of 10 years of
It,
dehumanizing these
it
amazing
is.
people. These
Yeah.
amazing, hardworking Christian people. They are more Christian, more family oriented, more hardworking than any American, and we have demonized them.
Yep.
They commit far less crimes than Americans do. They don't bring hardly any drugs through the border. Almost all the drugs come through America, come by American citizens. All of it is a lie. All of it is bogus. How Christians support it, I have zero idea. And I absolutely
I
think if
yeah.
Jesus were alive today, these are the modern day Pharisees that he would be railing against.
I think what gets me is that these people on the church are more concerned about protesters going into a church. Let's just say they shouldn't have gone in there. Okay, I don't care. Whatever. Don't go in the church. That's fine. I have no. But they're more upset about that than Renee Brown getting shot in the face. They're more
Right.
upset about that than. Did you see that Asian gentleman that was drug out of the shower?
But I saw the picture of him coming out of the house
Yeah,
with just a little
yeah.
blanket over his shoulders.
He
That
was
was
out of.
crazy.
They took him out of a shower. They drove him
Right.
around for an hour, fingerprinted him, asked him questions, and then they just dropped him back off at home with no charges. Embarrassed him.
Crazy. That's
But
absolutely
but
crazy.
they're more upset about the church thing. And there is this thing with
Right.
people on the right, and I'm an independent. I personally think that both political parties have failed us as a country. That's just me.
I agree.
I feel like
I'm with
the
you.
Republicans are make America white again, and the Democrats are just sitting around saying, vote for me in the midterms. I really do not like either party. That's just me. So I'm very middle of the road now. I would like I guess a Bernie or something like that. I don't even know who I'm going to vote
No,
for
I think
next
a
year.
lot of Americans are with you on that one. I'm with you on
Yeah,
that. I think both parties have, I mean, I'm not saying they're both equally bad, but I think they
right.
have both sold out
They have. They both let us.
corporate money.
Do you think? It's weird. I'm going to say. Do you believe that? And I believe that God sent Donald Trump here. And I know it's going to sound weird. When Moses was around, he hardened the heart of Pharaoh, right, to do his
Yeah.
will. Do you believe that in a way that maybe God sent Donald Trump here to expose the moral rot within his church? Because it kind of feels like we're seeing these pastors that are doubling down on racism and nationalism. And then you see these other pastors that are saying, hey, let's get our wills together. We're going to have to put our bodies in front of our fellow Americans. Like, that is what I want to see. People that just
Right.
care about other people. Does that make sense the way that I'm saying that?
Absolutely. I mean, if you can look, I made a video about a month ago exactly
Oh,
on that same story, Moses and Pharaoh. And I really believe we're in a let my people go moment. So when the George Floyd protests broke out in 2020, the first slave was brought here to Jamestown in 1619. The 400-year mark of that was 2019. So 2020 was our test. The heart cry of the Black community was laid bare. 10 to 20 million people came out to protest. I mean, unprecedented number of people all over the world protesting, raising our voice. What did we do? Nothing. We did nothing in
yep.
response to that heart cry. What happens immediately afterwards? January 6, 2021, right? The big lie, January 6th, everything changed from that moment. And I literally saw a blanket of deception come over the people that I was the closest with in my life. You could no longer have a conversation with these people based on facts. And I had no problem with any of them before. These are people I did inner city ministry with, people I did homeless ministry
Wow.
with. I mean, we used to pick up homeless guys from a tent camp and bring them to church every Sunday and make them lunch and hang out with them. I mean, these are not like bad people. One of the things I think that we get this idea from you watch in MSNBC, all these pastors are terrible. Like I know these people. They really truly have a heart, but
Yeah.
their silence, I think the bigger group is not the ones that are doubling down. The biggest group of pastors in this country that have failed us are the ones who are silent. They were
I
silent
agree.
in 2016, 2020, 24. They've been silent, and
Yeah.
their silence is complicity. But hold on, I want to go back to this.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
100% agree with you. Donald Trump is the test. He is the test, and we have failed. We have 100% failed. And I believe we are in a let my people go moment to the point where if we do not right the wrongs of our past, we are not going to have a nation anymore. We are at a point where we have got to do something. And I believe in reparations. A lot of people get mad at me for that. I believe we have to
No.
somehow repair the damage done. You can't steal wages from people for 250 years, transfer all that wealth to white people, then say, okay, you're free, but you don't give them any money, don't give them anywhere to go. They go right back to the plantations that they were freed from. It's total insanity, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
just feel like we're going in the opposite direction. It's like we're running from Moses. We're running from the call, let my people go. And we are hardening our hearts. But I feel like God's sending the plagues. Look at the plagues that have come upon our nation just since that
Hmm.
time. We had January 6th, we had the big lie, the loss of truth, the loss of
COVID.
just COVID, the tariffs, ICE, Greenland. I mean, it's insane. We have literally gone off the map of truth as a nation. We can't
Yeah.
even have conversations anymore. And I want to make a plug because I don't watch news, but I read news. Midas Touch, the Bulwark. There's lots of independent news outlets that are that do really good reporting, but legacy media is over.
I
Those,
don't like
the
it.
capitulation of legacy media. I mean, it is complete. I
I'll
think
make one. I'll make one plug because I believe that Rachel Maddow is incredible.
right.
But
Yeah, she
overall,
is
I
pretty
don't
awesome.
watch a lot of it.
Yeah,
I
no,
went to
she's
her high
solid.
school, so she's solid.
Oh,
Other
okay,
than
okay,
that, I don't watch a whole lot. But I
right.
think she's very fair. She puts the facts. She asks
Yeah,
questions. She goes, "If I'm wrong, tell
yep.
me." I could
I like
respect
that.
her, but
Yeah,
overall,
yeah, I'm with you on that one.
I don't have a whole lot. No.
But let me go back. Let me go back to just to close on what we're saying here is that this absolutely is a test. And it's a test of our hearts. Like
Hmm.
I always believe when Christianity goes wrong, we have to go back to love. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. love your
Hmm.
neighbor as yourself. God is testing us to see if we can recognize the common humanity in one another, if we can see the image of God in one another. Can we see the image of God in Somalis? Can we see the image of God in Haitians? Can we see the image of God in Venezuelans or Puerto Ricans or any Hispanic person or Asian person or whatever? Like
Hmm.
that is the core test. It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
We are failing the core test. All it takes for these people to do is say, "Oh, there's a bunch of Somalis over here." Never mind that they're legally here. Never mind that they've done all the right things. How do they get away with this? Because there's still a racist thread. You asked about the politics. It doesn't matter if the people of the time of slavery are the same people, the lost cause, MAGA. It doesn't matter. What matters is there is some racist remnant that's still hidden in our hearts. And until that is the
Yeah.
case, we will never be one nation under God,
Hmm.
indivisible.
It's interesting. I'm the more upset with white people in this country because since 1619, white people have watched people that don't look like you and I, especially black people, get treated like absolute garbage.
Right?
And they stood by during the civil rights movement. And I know people say, well, we made so much progress. I don't think we did. I think we suppressed it. And I think what happened is we got Donald Trump and he said, take off your white hoods and put on your red hats, be a racist in public. And I just don't think that white people are willing to be uncomfortable. And that's what really upsets me. Like you and I do this now. I can't, I don't know about you, but I get threats all the time. I get called, hey, you're a sellout to the white race, Oh, are you monetizing off of the black outrage? Like I get this, here's a firearm. I get it all the time. And what disappoints me is so many white people that they won't talk to like just the minimum, right? They won't talk to a friend. They won't post online. Like that silence is complicity. And I use this parable all the time. The similarity is, Derek Chauvin, what he did was despicable to George Floyd, right? But there was
Right.
three officers that stood by and
Yeah.
watched it happen. And for all the white people that are sitting in your privilege because you don't want to upset Uncle Bob, your Uncle Bob voted for a man who assaults women and is a pedophile. If that's who you're worried about upsetting, then maybe you're on the wrong side of history. But Martin Luther King said, we're not going to remember the words of our enemies, rather the silence of our friends. And right now, white people
Right.
are too goddamn silent.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. That's where the film is based. That's where our documentary is based. We talk about in the films open air slave markets on the streets of Charleston, South Carolina, where you could walk by and see
Mm.
people stripped down naked and being poked and prodded like cattle, because that's what they were legally treated as, like cattle. They were owned just like livestock. And so to be silent in that system, to be silent during Jim Crow, when if a black person looked at a white woman the wrong way, they could be strung up on a tree. And think about this again, this is the history that we don't realize. During Jim Crow, after lynching black people, they would take photographs with some maybe 10, maybe 100 white onlookers, and they would send them around as postcards. No indictments.
Mm.
This is like criminal evidence. Here you are sitting here. We murdered this guy, and there's no justice, right? So for we're not just complicit during the Trump era. We've been complicit, like you said, since
I agree.
1619. And
Yep.
again, this is why we are facing, I believe, God's judgment. Because how long can you stand by and watch these horrors unfold?
And
How long can you stand by and watch it? And I feel like our time is up. And this
yep,
is
I
the
agree.
call. Again, this is from my perspective as a
Yeah.
Christian, I'm not calling people to turn away from Jesus. I'm calling people to turn to the real Jesus, who literally said, "This is why I came, to bring good news to the poor and liberty to the oppressed." How you enslave and segregate and brutalize people. We haven't even mentioned the war on drugs. We've even talked
Mm.
about the millions upon millions of young black men who were hauled away to prison for petty drug crimes. We there's so much here. How do you justify this stuff in the name of Jesus? We've got to turn back to the real Jesus, because again, like we can see that the time of
Yeah.
America is running out.
It's interesting you said that because I've thought about this and I haven't figured out how I want to word it. On some level, I'm actually happy that Harris lost because it's forcing us to face the original sin of this country.
Right.
White people are not going to wake up until they get a fraction of it's what it's like to feel like a black person in the United States of America. And if this has to happen, if they have to lose their jobs and lose their homes, maybe I'm a nihilist, then so be it. Then burn it to the studs because, you know, my fear is that the Democrats are going to win in the midterms. Okay. And bear with me because what I'm afraid is that white people are going to get complacent again. Oh, well, my life is semi-normal. I'm not going to. This is why I wanted the government shut down last year. But the Democrats said, oh, no, people can't fly. They're going to be mad. And what about the midterms? Like, I don't care. Like, what's happening is horrible. How about you stop worrying about yourself and going on vacation to Tahiti and give a credit about somebody else? I mean, I really feel like white people have to suffer on some level in order to wake up. Do you agree?
C.S. Lewis famously said that suffering is God's megaphone to arouse a deaf world,
I have
right?
not heard that quote. That's a
Suffering is
great
God's
quote.
megaphone to arouse a deaf world, and it's true. And you look throughout the scriptures, God always sends the prophets to warn us. We don't listen to the prophets, and so disaster comes along. That's just the biblical pattern. It's the world pattern. People are hard-headed. People are stubborn. That's what sin is. Sin is this hard-heartedness that lives inside all of us. That's why Jesus came to defeat sin. But like you were saying, God cares more about souls than he cares about the United States government. That's the reality. So if he has
Yeah.
to tear this thing down to the studs to win our hearts, to show us where we're sick, I think God mourns over America every day. We are
Yeah.
a sick country. The fact that we can continue to fall for these racist dog whistles, like the Somali thing, really kind of got me. Or well, go to the Haitian thing. When Donald Trump went on, television in front of the entire
The
country and said the
dogs and
Haitians are
cats.
eating the cats and dogs. Like we just have to. I know we've heard it, we've rehashed it, but you just got to stop for 1 second. It wasn't true. There was no truth to that. These are people who were just came here for the same reasons that the European immigrants came here for, maybe a better life, some
Hmm.
security to raise their family, to start over. And we demonize them endlessly. And the Somalis, it's the same thing. And this is what I've been saying. We can't have a political solution until we have a heart solution because they're just going to pick some new scapegoat. Next week, it's going to be another scapegoat. Next week, it's going to be another scapegoat. It will never stop until we get our hearts right. And again, this is not rocket
It
science. This is just
no.
literally seeing the image of God in people that don't look like us. And yes, absolutely, it's very hard to be white in America because white people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to deal with it. They get
Nope.
defensive. If you even bring it up just a tiny little bit, I get so many threats just like you do all the time. Horrible
Yeah.
stuff. I get the most horrible stuff that people send me. And you're like, how do you justify this? When all we're fighting for is to get back to humanity, the basics of humanity. Like you said, love one another, love your neighbor as
But
yourself.
let me
But it's even deeper than that. Just
it
see each
is.
other as just as like I said, being made in the image of God, the Imago Dei.
Yeah. I believe that when you look at these I don't even call them Christians because they're not. They're really Pharisees. When you look at them, right, they focus on hell, fire, brimstone. You're a sinner. You're a sinner. You're going to burn in hell. Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers. And it seems like they've completely fornicated the entire New Testament or abdicated, like compassion, love. I mean, that's what Charlie Cook stood for, right? He said that empathy was weakness. Like, that's literally what Jesus spoke was empathy, compassion, kindness, loving each other. And it seems like these people with the red hats that they go to church with F Joe Biden and Joe and the whole bumper stickers, they don't seem to care about that at all. I mean, I don't even, I almost wonder if MAGA would deport Jesus. They would say he's probably a woke, radical left liberal. I mean, do you, I mean, it doesn't seem like they would even, they think that Jesus is some weak little sissy man.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand those people. And again, what I would say is that that's not the majority. The
Mm,
majority of white Christians in this country are actually decent people, good
yeah.
people. I mean, they don't have the Joe and the Ho bumper sticker on their car. They do go to church. They are
Yeah.
trying. But I think we've just been deceived, hoodwinked. I always say deception works because it's deceptive. It's, the devil, he has pulled the
Yeah.
wool over our eyes. And again, a lot of these people don't love Donald Trump. A lot of them are just voting on the abortion issue still. And I think so
Yeah.
there is a lot of deception. And I'm not saying that excuses them, because at this point there is
Yeah.
no excuse. At this
Yeah.
point, there's absolutely no excuse. And the other thing that's odd to me is even those people, so I'm narrowing it down to this segment, that this group of people will never say one word about Donald Trump, right? Because
Mm-mm.
I'm willing to say, look, if Clinton is in the Epstein files,
Lock them up.
lock him up. If Trump's in the Epstein files, lock him up. Like if Biden is in the Epstein files, lock him up. We don't have allegiance to any person. I have an allegiance to God. I have allegiance to Jesus. I have allegiance to truth. I have allegiance to justice. I have
Hmm.
allegiance to love, but not any person. And so there's a mystery there. I don't know how this has happened, but the Bible talks about a strong delusion coming over
Oops, sorry.
people, refusing to, you know, receive the truth. And I think that there's something spiritual going on. And again, I keep going back to Pharaoh. There is a
Yeah,
hardening of the heart.
there
I
is.
think that God is confronting us. He's forcing us to deal with the original sin. It's slavery, racism, and greed are the two ingredients that cause slavery. Greed is really the first component. Racism is used to justify the means of accomplishing greed, right?
Hmm.
So we dehumanize people so that we can enslave them, so that we can make money. I always ask
Right.
my kids what's slavery about? And they say, you say wealth or capital. It's like, no, but just say money. Just put it as that. We literally did all of this stuff, the 12.9 million people who were kidnapped from their homes for money, for more money. And when you put it that way, that's really twisted, right? Like you
It
said, even
is.
Trump and the cost of eggs. We just want more money in our pocket. So here we are, guys. Welcome to the big show. Here's one
It's
year of Trump
interesting.
today.
I always make this parallel that many of these evangelicals, these MAGA, are actually more in common with Satan and Jesus. They both believe in God. They both weaponize the Bible, and neither one of them actually follow God. Because faith without works is dead. People can have, it's rich that some of the most nastiest, meanest, cruelest people have John 3:16, or they quote Isaiah or a minor prophet or a major prophet, God first, freedom, bald eagles, all the normal nationalist stuff. They're the nastiest people you've ever met in your life. Isn't that rich?
Well, so going back to Matthew 23, I really do believe that Jesus would have a lot of harsh words for
Oh,
American
yeah.
Christians today. So
Oh,
one of the things he said
yeah.
to the Pharisees, sorry, he said this. He said, you search over sea and land for one convert, and you make that convert twice as much a child of hell as you are. And again, we have to think about the context. The Pharisees were the
Hmm.
revered religious leaders of their day. These are the people that everyone looked up to. They fasted twice a week. They were holy. They kept the law perfectly. Jesus said, you tithe mint and dill and cumin. So think about taking 10% out of your spice jar and giving it to
Mm.
God, right? But he said, but you neglect the weightier matters of justice, faithfulness, and mercy. So they're over here. They're taking the little 10% of their spice jar out,
Mm.
but they are neglecting mercy and justice and faithfulness. So I think that again, those parallels are very, very apt. And I don't know. To me, so one of the things that roots me in my faith is 20 years ago. I mentioned this very briefly in the film, but I was an atheist drug addict, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
I took a bunch of LSD. So I was smoking pot every day. I was taking a lot of cocaine, ecstasy. I took pain pills almost every single day. I was really in a hopeless place, but I got my hands on some LSD. I took 27 hits of LSD and I tried to drown myself in the ocean. I was going to end my life. And in the middle of that swim, I encountered God, but I had this revelation of hell. And
Mm.
it was the most horrible thing. I'm not going to go too deep into it. It was horrible. And I've literally never forgotten it. 20 years. I gave my life to Jesus in the middle of the ocean on an 18-hour swim in the ocean, uh, where I'm in Charleston,
I don't
South
think I remember
Carolina.
that from the movie. That's crazy.
I might not have gone into all that, but I literally swam in the ocean. The Coast Guard, was looking for me. They stopped looking for me because statistically, after about 10 hours in the ocean without flotation, you're
How
dead.
long
I
were you out
survived.
there?
I was in the water 18 hours. I literally swam without flotation for
No
18 hours. I
way.
ended up 7 miles from where I started,
Oh, my
um,
God.
right in the Atlantic Ocean. That was how I got baptized really, really, really quick into my Christian faith.
How were
But
you
I say that
found?
because I actually swam ashore at a five-star resort on Kiowa Island, which is a resort island. Um, very, very fancy hotel. I'm pretty tall and I was naked. They were not happy to see me at the five-star resort at 11
How
o'clock at
long, how
night.
far did you swim in total? How many miles?
I landed 7 miles from where I started, but I went out and back. So my plan was to swim out as far as I could so that if I changed my mind at the last minute, I wouldn't be able to come back.
Oh my
And so I
God.
swam all the way out, sobered up, and then I started swimming back. So I don't know exactly how much ground I covered. I ended up 7 miles from where I started.
Oh
But
God.
my point in all of that is that I had this revelation of hell. So I never joke about hell. I let God judge who goes to heaven and hell. But I do, like I said, all these parallels that we're seeing, I see them as well. And I don't, I'm not, I would never, I pray for Donald Trump that he would be saved. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but I pray for everyone. I pray for his family. I pray for Congress. I pray for his cabinet. I don't want anyone to go to hell. That's not for me. That's not something I want. I just see the hypocrisy that you see. I see the blinders that you see. I
Hmm.
don't understand how we can be Christian people and supporting 1 ounce of this agenda. It doesn't make
No.
any sense. The
And
only way
yeah,
I can explain it is that we are in some kind of test, some kind
yep.
of, I feel like we're in a funnel. God keeps pushing us right back. We have to go back if we're going to go forward. The only way forward for our nation is for us to repent of this original sin
Yeah.
that
I
keeps
before I
plaguing
was
us generation after generation.
yeah. No, I think that's good. I was going to wrap up here in a second, but I think for people like you and I think what I get on my YouTube channel more than anything is, they believe in God. They're people of faith, and they feel like their faith has been hijacked by this white supremacist "Make America White Again" movement. It has nothing to do with God or Jesus. It is white supremacy. That's just what it is. And I think they're happy to see people saying, and I would say this, I believe, and maybe it's a distinction. God never said to be religious. He never said to be a quote unquote Christian, to have rosary beads, to be Pentecostal or Catholic. He said to have the faith of a child, that if you had the faith of a mustard seed, you could move mountains. And I think what I'm seeing is we have a lot of people that are very religious, like the Pharisees, right? Like, I religiously brush my teeth. I religiously podcast. I religiously go to the gym. I religiously work. Versus they don't seem like they believe in anything. They don't stand for anything. Does that make sense? Maybe that's a
Yeah, no,
distinction.
absolutely. Listen, I'm here. I'm with you. I don't
Yeah.
understand for 1 minute what's going on. I think so. One of the things that I have done in my own personal walk with Christ is I have been in and around the Black church
Mm,
for 13 years now. My wife and I joined the Black church 13 years ago, and it has been so tremendously helpful because a lot of people look at Christianity in America and they only see the evangelical thread. But there's
mm.
this other thread in the Black church. One of the things you were talking about earlier, when we tell American history, we always tell a mythologized version, like we ended slavery, we ended Jim Crow. It's like, no, actually, it was Black Christians with a handful of white allies. But the
Yeah.
Black Christian church has stood up for justice from the beginning in this country. They fought and died for the end of slavery. They fought and died for the end of Jim Crow. They came out, like I said, 10 to 20 million in the George Floyd protests, fighting against the war on drugs. So there is a faithful witness in the Black Christian tradition that really
Hmm.
flies in the face of evangelicalism. And I think that if we could ever humble ourselves as white people and
Mm.
learn from this tradition, my podcast host is Pastor Joel Bowman. He's a pastor in Louisville, Kentucky, Sins of
Oh
Our Fathers
wow.
podcast. I learned so much from him. I currently go to a Black church. I mean, I'm constantly learning from the witness of Black Christians who have maintained their faith in God, but have also continually, for hundreds of years, stood up for those who suffer in this country and around the world. And I think that, again, evangelicalism isn't the only strain of Christianity. There is a really faithful witness. It's right here. I had someone ask me, how do I find a church? I was like, look, probably a Black church within 10 minutes of your house. Like, there are so many people that are really practicing the faith, doing it right. I go to a lot of Black churches. I have never been into a Black church that was confused by Donald Trump. Not one time have I ever. Now I know there are some. I have heard, unfortunately, that there are some. I have never encountered one. They are not confused. And I always ask them why. And they said, we've been living this thing for 400 years. You know, so I think that we could learn if we could ever open our eyes and our ears, you know. And
yeah,
one more thing I want to say.
yeah,
This is I think this is important. People always say to me like, "Oh, we had the Crusades, you have the Spanish Inquisition, slavery, Jim Crow, the war on drugs, Trump, all justified in Jesus' name. Don't you think Christianity is bogus?" But the reality is, Jesus warned us about these people. He said, "Beware of false prophets. They come like wolves in sheep's clothing." And what better sheep's clothing than Christianity itself? Christianity has been
mm,
so manipulated, so used as a cloak, as a mask
yep,
for all kinds of evil through ever
yeah,
since Jesus came. And I think we've got to be more discerning. We talk about Christian nationalism all the time. Christianity is just the cloak that they put over their nationalism. We've got to start looking and seeing, hey, this is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Jesus warned us about this. Let's go the other way, like what Jesus actually taught. And I think that if we could just focus on that, we would be
yeah.
so much better off as a nation.
And the last thing I'll say before I let you go here is, it's interesting when I listen to the 92%. For those of white people that don't know, that's basically the black women that voted for
92% of Black
Harris.
African American women.
They
Yeah.
are, if you're not following black women, then you're missing out because they are the smartest people in this
Yep.
damn country. But it goes to what you said. And why are they smarter? Because they have to work 2 and 3 and 4 times as hard as a white person just to get the same level of respect or education or job. So they're the most educated people in the entire country. They've grown up in the refiner's fire. Like people like me and people like you, like I grew up in a very abusive house. My dad used to beat us, right? And I feel like people that have grown up in that darkness, they've been through that fire, they have calluses on their hands, and they know they've struggled. And when you have a lot of white people that have never struggled in their life, they don't know how to do it. So just to help people understand why they're so smart, that's why they're extremely educated, they're well spoken, they're articulate, they're wise. I just
I think
interviewed.
resilient too. You got to add
Yeah.
resilient to that. They are the most resilient people
Oh yeah.
because they face so much opposition. We have so much to learn from the
Yep.
Black community, but we seem to be so reluctant as white people to do that, and
It's a
it's a
shame.
shame. I think it's a
Yep.
shame.
You want to tell people where they can find you, and I'll let you go enjoy the rest of your day, sir.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So check out the Sins of Our Fathers, Race, Religion, and the Rise of Trump. You can see that on Amazon Prime Video. My name is Matthew Pidgeon. I'm on most social media channels. So definitely, if check out the film, and if you want to continue on that conversation, you can find me online.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, buddy.
All right. It was my pleasure.
All right.